he set me up in a conference room at a big table with all the heads of departments for the FD RX7. So on my left was Kojima, who designed the suspension. Next to him was the head engine development guy, and then there was the head of brake department there. So I had all these engineers at a table in front of me that were there to just answer my questions.
Wow. Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Peter Farrell from Peter Farrell Supercars. Peter, interestingly, is a Kiwi. Despite that, his company, Peter Farrell Supercars, or PFS, was founded and developed in the US. Now, Peter's got a very interesting background with a love of rotaries and a love of competition racing, both on gravel and on tarmac. At a point in his life, he made the leap of faith to move to the US to pursue this racing career, and following that, spent around 38 years living stateside. He saw a lot of success over there, even competing as a factory-backed driver in the IMSA series. And this moved into developing his PFS company, where he built parts for the FD3S RX-7 platform. This is a platform that's quite difficult to provide an aftermarket standalone ECU for due to the complexities around the sequential twin turbo system. And PFS was actually the first company to bring a tuning solution to market, even before the popular Apexi Power FC. This was a piggyback tuning system, and it did have its limitations, of course, as you could imagine, but this unlocked the performance of the RX-7. On top of this electronic tuning piggyback, he also built a bunch of hard parts to optimize the performance of the RX-7 platform. We also get into some of the intricacies of the 13B engine, or rotary engines in general, why they sometimes get a bad reputation and what needs to be done with the tuning in order to keep them reliable. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place, and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools, or just about anything in between. They are great prizes, and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Peter. Thanks for joining us. And as always, let's start by digging into your past a little bit. How did you first develop an interest in cars?
Well, it's been a lifelong task. When I was 13 years old, I joined the Hamilton Car Club in New Zealand, and that got me officially involved. And it wasn't until I was probably 16 or 17 that was my first chance to compete, and I competed in the Mystery Creek Rally Cross in a 3-litre V6 Capri, Ford Capri, English car. And that was my first shot at it, but unfortunately another competitor in a less of a street car decided to take the right side out of my Capri, and that taught me the first lesson of motorsport that, you better bring some money.
It's not a cheap sport, is it?
No. I probably spent about a month or more of my wages to fix the damage on the car at the time. I was just an apprentice at actually New Zealand Aerospace Industries, studying to be an aircraft engineer. And that, so anyhow, so that put the brakes on it for a little bit until 1979. 1979, I bought a Mark I Ford Escort RS2000, a rally car.
Actually, I'll just jump in here. Obviously, we quite often find people will go in one or two paths. It's either rally or road race. And what was it about rally that really appealed to you?
Truthfully, watching the Walmart Mike Marshall and Hanu Mikler in the Mark I Escort RS1600 BDAs
Yeah.
back in the early rallies in New Zealand, in the Heatway Rally, etc. And I just love the sound of those BDAs screaming at 9,000 RPM, and so that's I guess what pulled me towards rally. And that's where I went initially, anyhow. As the story goes on, I, of course, changed to road racing, but...
Sure, yeah. I mean, just it doesn't always have to be mutually exclusive, but generally I kind of find that drivers will go on one of those two paths. And yeah, the old story, the circuit racer sees one corner 1,000 times and the rally driver sees 1,000 corners one time. I personally think rally drivers are probably the most talented in the motorsport world, but I'm sure others would disagree on that. You mentioned you were doing an apprenticeship. So what did your sort of work history look like?
Well, I started off in that apprenticeship building aeroplanes, basically, but I actually kind of quit that about a year and a half in, and I joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force because I found my interest was actually more with the engine side of planes and not so much, pop rivets and building, doing production line sort of work. So even though I was getting some training in the mechanical side as well. So I quit aerospace and went and joined the Air Force in 76, and I went on to serve 8 years in New Zealand Air Force, worked on the C-130s and the P-3 Orions, Iroquois helicopters, and I really found my home with the P-3s and the engines, the big T56 turboprops, and I was qualified to do high power test runs on those engines and stuff, and that sort of really excited me. So I enjoyed my time in the Air Force right up until the point where I moved to America. But during that period, of course, I pursued my career in rally in New Zealand. Like I said, I bought that Mark I Escort. My first event was the 79 Maramarua Forest Rally, and I'd never done a rally, and I just started. So it was 5 stages, and I started at the first stage and drove as hard as I could. Oh, I probably should add that I actually did do a race driving course at Bay Park with actually my boss at the time, Selwyn Melville. It was called the Peter Farrell Advanced Driving School. So I actually went to Bay Park and learned car control, understeer, oversteer, balance of a chassis, and the basics you need to know, how to take a line through a corner.
Yeah, sure. I'm interested to dive into that just briefly as well. So how does that driving course work? How do you learn those skills, and how much is sort of practical hands-on in the car versus sort of classroom based?
Well, it was a little bit of classroom, told you the line through a turn, the apex, all that good sort of stuff. But I think it was actually fantastic. It was only a 1-day course, but it took me away from just the voodoo grit your teeth form of competing. I actually had a kind of clue what I was doing, had some training, and that, I think, got me off to a great start. And next thing I knew, I was in a rally car facing a flag to start a gravel stage at Maramarua, and of course the lines and everything are different, but I did have a good feeling for car control and grip. So I charged into there blindly, not knowing whether I was going fast or slow. I just went as fast as I could without going off the road.
I'm going to assume that would have not had pace notes at that point.
No, pace notes were illegal. You'd be disqualified if you were caught with pace notes.
So you're literally driving each of those stages blind if you haven't done that rally the year before.
That's right, you're blind. But in those days the roads were fantastic in Maramarua. They were smooth and outstanding, not too rough. So anyhow, I charged off and thought, hey, this is fun. And I think I got through at the end of stage 3. I had no clue how I was going at that point. It was like 128 entries, and I think I was seated 62 because I had a pretty good car for the field. And at the end of stage 3, they brought the results through, and I found that I was in like 9th overall in the rally.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
I couldn't believe it. And as the story goes, I go into stage 4, and I'm pretty cocky at this point now. I'm top 10.
Dangerous.
So we get to the last stage. Now I'm really cocky, and I make the cardinal rule: to finish first, you have to finish. And I lost it high-sided at probably half a kilometre from the end of the last stage, and went up a bank and broke the steering rack and DNF'd. And I always tell this story. When I got back to the Air Force, my mates on Monday, they said, "So Farrell, how did you do? I bet you crashed." And I had to say, yes, I did crash, but I was going bloody well up until that point. And then I realised that you can't, unless you complete it, you can't.
No, it doesn't really count, does it?
Doesn't count. So I guess that put some fire in my blood right back then. And I thought, look, I can't tell these guys how well I was really doing because I didn't finish. And I made a pact, which I pretty much held for most of my life, that I'm not gonna overdrive. I'm not gonna let it get away from me. I'm gonna go hard, but I'm never gonna go over 9.5, 10 tenths, because crashing, you don't win a medal. And so I set off on a path of finishing events, and I've had a pretty fantastic record of finishing rallies, and that often rewarded me with high placings against potentially faster cars.
Yeah, good work.
So anyhow, so we went through that, and that was 79, so I got the bug. 80, I did a lot more events and got a little bit more knowledgeable, and that is still paying for this thing out of my Air Force wages, I might point out. But I started to enjoy the benefit of my mechanical expertise. So I jumped on a C-130 Hercules Air Force plane and hitchhiked a ride to the United States. And I ran around all the top tuners at that time buying parts for the 2-litre Pinto motor, of course, at RS2000. So I went to Crower, met Brian Crower, bought a set of connecting rods from him, and went over to Hilborn and looked into buying some mechanical injection, and, filled my bag up with TRW rockers, and went over to Ed Escuderian and bought a camshaft, met Ed and T. Willie. So my bag came home full of car parts.
So literally a free trip to the States, hitching a ride on a C-130, and it was a shopping expedition.
Yeah. It was called indulgence travel, if anybody's concerned about the tax toll.
That wasn't the thing that sprung to my mind. I guess at this point in time as well, it would have been much more difficult to source these parts inside of New Zealand, right? It's not like it is today, where we sort of really have free access to everything the rest of the world's got.
Absolutely true what you just said. No, the stuff was not thick on the ground. It was difficult to get. But anyhow, I put my name on the list, and when they have available space, you get a call up the day before and say, "Hey, do you want to go to America?" So I was all set to go. And so came back with the parts, built up another good Pinto motor, about 180 odd horsepower, 185 on 45 side draft Webers, and had the good hardware inside. But that's 1980. Campaigned that car in 1981. I competed in the 1981 Motor Guard International Rally, and once again did really well on day one. I think I was leading Group 2 at the time, but halfway through day 2, these events, by the way, were 3 or 4 days long back in those days. And, night time, everything, big, long 18-hour days. So, but anyhow, I lost it on the Cricketwood stage in Wairoa, rolled the Escort, let my desire to win exceed my ability to do it.
Broke your rule again.
Yep. So we damaged that Escort, and that was it for that event, but took it home and regrouped for 1982. I built up a brand new Mark II Escort and moved all the driveline from the Mark I over to it. I campaigned that in 1982 with quite good success. I actually won my first event, which was the Woodhill Rally, where I had the privilege of actually beating Possum Bourne.
Wow, that's very much a claim to fame.
It is. It's true. The record shows. Although I must say that he got a puncture in the first stage, so I kind of had about a 2-minute.
If you kept that to yourself, we would have never been any the wiser. For those international listeners who have absolutely no idea who we're talking of, Possum Bourne is a New Zealand rally driver. I think probably our most successful, who ran in the WRC.
Well, I mean, Hayden Paddon,
is now our claim to fame. But Possum Bourne back in the day, I think he won the Australian Rally Championship a number of times, didn't he?
Yes, he did, absolutely. One of the reasons Possum was so well known, international folks might relate to, is he was driving the Subaru WRXs at the same time as Colin McRae, etc., and competed as a teammate to Colin McRae in various events. And of course, Colin had his fame through the rallying games that were just starting to come online on the internet. And that, so anyhow, I beat Possum, and he was driving a Mazda RX-3 at that point, a coupe with a 13B PP motor, kind of ex-Rod Millen sort of stuff. So I was thrilled with that. Went on to do quite well all year in that one. And I particularly like rally sprints, which is like about a 5 or 6 kilometre sprint up a hill or whatever through a stage, and you have a runoff system. And I seem to adapt well to those. So
actually, I just want to let's just dive into that, because I don't do rally. Something I'd definitely like to try out, but I'd liken that to a tarmac hill climb. I personally find, for me, if I'm in a race car out on the racetrack, it will take me, maybe 5 laps or so to kind of find my groove and get into the right headspace to really push. And I kind of find if I go to a club level hill climb event, it's a lot of sort of standing around waiting for maybe 3 or 4 runs up a hill. And by the time you're sort of starting to feel like you're into the groove, you've gone across the finish line. So I've never really kind of felt that they work. I don't find that I work that well for that sort of event. So obviously you're the polar opposite.
Yeah, I would say that's true, because generally in those events you pick up 3 or 4 seconds or 5 seconds each run.
Yeah.
And that, so and the pressure's on. So no, I generally improve on each run, and that because I learn the road. I mean, I do learn the road. I remember the grip level, and I remember the turns. So in rallying, as you're probably aware, it's a momentum sport, and it's also a risk and reward. In a rally car, you have to carry speed into the turns, and you better get it right, because if you get it wrong, you crash off the road. This is the first time you've seen the corner. You don't know what the grip level's like, and that's one of the talents of blind rallying, is being able to read the road.
Oh, you couldn't agree more.
And I sort of was kind of pretty good at that, and managed to keep a good balance. I might not have always been the fastest guy, but I didn't go off the road. So I used to put down pretty decent stage times, and be very consistent and finish, and that, so rather than bounce off all the banks all the way through. Anyhow, the big deal there that I think could be of interest to some people is those rally sprints became very competitive, and some of them were televised, and so I got an opportunity to drive a guy's, this is 1983, I'll point out, and a friend of mine had an Escort RS-2000 with a turbocharged Pinto in it, and that had belonged to a guy called Bruce Mannon, who's still around. You've probably heard of him. He became well known with turbo cars from back then. So this is 82, 83. I charmed the guy, my friend, on the streetcar to use his engine for the next rally sprint. So we pulled my engine out and put it in the rally car and put mine into his, which he liked. But unfortunately, there wasn't a dyno on every corner, and there was certainly no wide bands to be found. So we put a leg out of bed, we used to say. We broke a conrod from detonation, and next thing I was into building a fresh engine, which I did, and we had to just tune it by thrashing up and down the road, basically. And the setup was it used actually a divided pulse, a split pulse T4 manifold, and that came out of Australia, and it was a cast piece that was actually pretty nice. A T04S turbo, I think it was 0.58 AR housing actually, but what was special is it was sucking, the fuel system was sucking through a side draft Weber.
So it was a draw through setup.
Yeah, draw through. Yeah, a draw through side draft Weber, 45 Weber, and it used water injection to prevent detonation.
Yes, the problem with a draw through setup, of course, is that you can't run an intercooler, which is kind of an essential realistically if you're running any reasonable level of boost. So the water injection, another way of getting around that.
That was pretty effective, actually. Back then, intercoolers were thin on the ground too.
Of course, yeah.
In fact, keep in mind, there was hardly any production turbocharged cars. The first Mitsubishis, like the Cordia turbos and stuff, were just coming out on the market, and so turbocharging was brand new for street cars.
Yeah, the stuff that we sort of take for granted now, of being able to buy all of these parts aftermarket, that simpler times, and I guess the knowledge probably wasn't there like it is now as well.
No, it's just just amazing to me. And honestly, I was in the early days of it, and what we have today, I just think, my God, if I only had this stuff 40, 50 years ago,
Oh, we're spoiled for choice. I even look back at my old drag car, and that was a 1400 horsepower Mitsubishi 4G63 2-litre. And we had an HKS T51R SPL turbocharger, which at the time was brand new. But looking at how far turbo technology's come since the early 2000s when I was running that car, I'd sort of often think if I could have my time again, I'd have been making more power with less boost and had a wider power band as well. But of course, we can't have our time again, so it is what it is.
Well, of course, that's why experience counts. You learn these things.
I think the takeaway from this, though, is for the younger listeners is you've got it very good at the moment. It's never been easier to build a turbocharged engine and have it hold together, make great power with great reliability.
Well, not to speak of, if you don't know what you're doing, you just log on to HP Academy and Andres fills you in on everything you don't know that you need to know.
Correct. And doing my best.
There you go. No, I mean, and I actually say that sincerely. I mean, your content is just phenomenal.
I appreciate it.
And very rarely, if maybe never, do I think he's bullshitting.
I try very hard not to.
No. I find you on the mark pretty much. So anyhow, the water injection, 5-pound Hobbs switch on the manifold. When she made 5 pounds of boost, it turned on a cheap windscreen washer pump, and that squirted water methanol through a brake line that I'd hit with a hammer on a vise to make a jet, and it sprayed water methanol down the throat of the carby, and that was good for another 5 pounds of boost without detonation.
Wow.
And also, we cut the compression ratio back to like 7-1.
Yeah.
So we used to machine the top off the TRW forged pistons and drop the compression way down, use water injection, and we could run 15, 20 pounds of boost, and I picked up about 100 horsepower. So I went from 180 normally aspirated to about 280 boosted.
Wow.
And I took that to the next rally sprint, and boy, did I take it to the other guys. I shocked them all. I mean, I'd picked up 100 horsepower between events.
Yeah, that's no small feat.
And the car was a rocket, and I won the Riverhead Rally Sprint, and I went back to Woodhill, won the Woodhill Rally for a second year, but this time on merit completely. Well, I was on merit the first time, but no punches involved, and the car was just a rocket down the straights. I mean, Escorts only weigh, 900 kg or 2100 pounds, so the thing flew down the straights. Talk about turbo lag there. In hindsight, had a lot of turbo lag.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to dig into there. First of all, detonation. So back then you couldn't ring up Link Engine Management and buy a knock block, or I don't think there was any real option available back at that sort of era. So how were you figuring out when the engine was knocking? Is it just when it threw a rod out of the block? So yeah, I'll back it off a few degrees.
I listened to ping. I could hear ping, and it's not like a rotary. We'll get to that next, I'm sure, but they were a little bit forgiving.
Yeah.
But what we did, the only tool we had, and I think you might find this interesting, is the only tuning tool we had at that point was an ISOPRO pyrometer or EGT gauge. So we used to tune off EGT basically. And the ignition had a distributor, and that was just fixed. It didn't have flyweights. It was a fixed, maybe 8 degrees, something like that. So we couldn't move the ignition around. So, and low compression, the water methanol injection, and tuning, keeping exhaust gas temperatures down.
Yeah.
And, fortunately, Bruce Mannon had done a pretty good job with that Weber getting it in the ballpark. So I didn't make big changes. I would not have wanted to be the one to start from scratch with the...
No, well, I mean, it'd be a very steep learning curve there. Again, simpler times, forums, well, probably there's not enough other people doing what you were doing to sort of get a wealth of information anyway. So it really literally is sort of hard-learned lessons.
Totally. At that point in time, the only turbo rally cars in New Zealand was mine, Maury Chandler's Lancer Turbo. He just got that. Of course, Reg Cook got a Bluebird Turbo, a Works Bluebird Turbo. And there's a couple of guys in the South Island, Trevor Parmenter. But that was about it for turbo cars. So they were a real novelty. All these years later, when I talked to my friends 45 years later or 42 years later, and they just all remember that turbo car, that I was a pioneer and what a difference, and it was a way of the future. And
Oh, absolutely. Well, just actually before we carry on, the other part that I wanted to ask about was the turbo lag, which you mentioned. Obviously, turbo technology back then isn't where it is now. So yeah, I just with another 100 horsepower, but also with the lag, the way that power is delivered, did that give you? Obviously, it worked because the car was fast, but did it give drivability problems when the boost would come on?
well, it did, but I didn't know it at the time. I knew that when I got jumped on the gas, I mean, it wasn't. I had what I used to have, and then when it made boost, it went like a rocket. So basically, you had to plan your corner, and plan to, when you get on the gas, you were going to get wheel spin. You had to try to adapt your driving style, so you took advantage of rocketing out of the turns and down the straights. And going back to what I was saying earlier, the speed in, you had to just be cautious. Basically, I had to be fairly cautious going in because I didn't have good throttle control. In a rally car, you steer with the throttle, and that's why BDGs and Rotaries are actually so good, because they have a fairly progressive power, and they're fairly instantaneous when you crack open the throttle plate. So I didn't have that, but boy, having another 100 horsepower made up for it all. And the big thing that's so satisfying for me now is, I was a shoestring budget sort of guy, like so common back when you're young, and I found the secret sauce that put me up with the guys with the big budgets. The peripheral port 13Bs were kind of still new at that time. Rod Millen and Rotary Power, and Bill Shields was a pioneer of that. So I've had about the same power as a good 13B PP, like 280 horsepower, and I actually had more than a BDG. So I found a cheap way and a Kiwi way to match the top budget cars for horsepower, and it delivered. So
I'm assuming at this point as well, what you'd cobbled together on your shoestring budget versus a peripheral port 13B would have been a factor of 10 times the cost for the 13B, maybe more.
Oh, well, I don't even know what they cost. I knew I couldn't afford one, so I don't know what the guys were paying back.
Probably a moot point, but suffice to say, much, much more money.
Yeah. But there was some, iconic names, of course, back then. John Wolfe was a friend of mine. He had one and took it to America. And, of course, Rod Millen went on to be iconic. And back when we talked about rally drivers, he's right up there in that elite of the Hayden Paddon, Rod Millen, Possum Bourne. I'd say they're the three biggest names.
Yeah, I mean, Rod Millen would probably be the most internationally recognised name, given the business he set up in America and his success at Pikes Peak as well as all of his other success.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, no doubt about it. And probably this is a good time to actually bring in that my co-driver, when I started in the Mark II, brand new Mark II, I recruited a Air Force mate to co-drive for me, and his name was Tony Sercom. And Tony ended up becoming probably one of the few professional international rally co-drivers. And Tony and Greg Ford, my mechanic, moved to the States in early 84. Tony came with me, and he co-drove for me in the States in 84. And I guess I'll just kind of stay on Tony for a second. Well, after a year doing rally in the States in 84, Tony went on to co-drive for John Woodner, a guy that a good friend of mine, had a Peugeot 205 T16, and then unfortunately John was killed in a small aircraft crash about 88. And Tony went on to co-drive for Rod Millen in many of the US rallies and the Asia Pacific series, and he also co-drove for Possum in the Australian series.
I remember seeing that name on Possum Bourne's car. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, his name's on the 323 GTX that's down at the museum in Southland. I saw it a couple of months ago. So anyhow, Tony went on to have a successful career. Well, I got Tony started. He co-drove for me in the Escort and in the Turbo Escort, and we kind of did a little bit of a Burt Munro, to be honest with you. Put everything we had in our suitcases. I put all my money and future retirement from the Air Force in my pocket, and went to America to go rallying.
So it was to go rallying. That was the whole plan.
Oh yeah. No clear path of what to do, where to live, nothing really, and that sort of kind of bridges me into my USA venture.
Just before we go any further, I'm interested here. I've never really seen the US as being sort of what I'd say home of international rally. I think it's fair to say if you look at WRC, sort of Europe's kind of the epicenter. Yes, of course, there is rallying in the US and it's at a very high level these days. I don't know what it was like back then. The question here, I guess, is why choose the US over Europe?
Oh, okay. Well, the answer, everything, why I chose was because one of those good Air Force free trips on the C-130 took me over there in, I think, 1980, and I crewed for John Wolfe in the last event for the Mazda RX-3, John and Grant, out of Las Vegas, Nevada. So I kind of got the feel for what it was about, and Rod was there in the RX-7s, and it was about the time he just built his four-wheel drive car. John Buffum was running an Audi Quattro, and they were brand new hot machines at the time. And I realised that I couldn't go much further in New Zealand rallying because I was buying the worn tyres from the guys I was trying to beat.
Yeah.
So, I was income limited with wages. So, and I had a sense of adventure. So I sold up everything I had in New Zealand, put the money in my pocket and put my belongings in a suitcase, and off to America we went. So what made it work is I bought a Datsun 510 coupe off John Woodner. And this is a car that was actually built up for Rod Millen in 79, or when he had a deal with Datsun, let's call it what it was, Datsun. And Woodner bought it. Woodner was a fairly wealthy real estate guy from Washington, D.C., and Woodner put a Cosworth BDG engine into the 510 and an Atlas diff, because it used to break the Nissan axles. But SCCA banned doing motor swaps between different manufacturers. So I didn't get the BDG. I had to put an L20 Nissan single camera back in it.
That would have been a big step back from the BDG.
Oh, yes, it was. So I had to go back to having the old 180 horsepower, normally aspirated. So, but, what made that work is Woodner offered us to work out of his race shop in Washington, D.C., and also gave us, he owned, or from his family, a 1,200-unit apartment building about 3 miles from the White House in D.C. called the Woodner. And there'll be some old school Kiwis that are going to know all about that because quite a few went over and visited. But anyhow, we got to stay in the Woodner and prep our car, and that helped a lot. And we got going. Tony and I got to win a rally, the Arkansas Traveller Rally, but that was just a regional sort of rally, so the top guns weren't there. And I competed in some of the famous events over there in Pennsylvania, the STPR rally, the whole season in 1984. So
how were you funding all of this? What were you doing to make ends meet in the US?
Good question. I sometimes wonder how. Just real shoestring, no income really. I mean, I had an American Express card, and my dad used to pay it off a little bit back in New Zealand.
Okay, the old bank of mum and dad.
Yeah, but my parents weren't wealthy, but Dad, did what he could do. So not too much, and that's why I learned I couldn't crash. All my life, with a few exceptions, I've been in a situation that if I crashed it, I would be done. Anyhow, the most memorable point in '84 in my US rally career was the Reno, Nevada International, where Hanu Mikla was in a Quattro, Millen in a 4-drive RX-7, brother Steve Millen driving another RX-7. There was like 5 or 6 FIA seeds in it. So there was some top guys in that event. It was the 180 horsepower didn't work for me. We weren't competitive. And so we took it back to the Woodner and did the old Kiwi turbocharged trick again.
If it worked once, why won't it work again?
That's right. That's what I thought. So we pretty much cloned the Pinto turbo and grafted on a T4 flange onto a cast manifold and bolted up a T04. Got a Weber. The good thing is all these parts were really cheap and available in the States, of course. So we did the same thing, dropped the compression, water injection, and it went well. It went all right. I mean, we picked up some grunt for sure. And I actually never broke a motor. I mean, I got the tuning pretty bloody close.
That's quite impressive. Were you dealing with dynos at this point, or is it still a butt dyno?
No, butt dyno. butt dyno and fingers crossed, and EGT gauge. Like I said, we had that EGT gauge. So I just sort of followed the formula that we learned with the Escort, and that got us back out there, and we were actually faster, but still, of course, not fast enough with two-wheel drive against four-drive and that. But I had a very memorable event, one of my last events at Reno, where we made it up to, through attrition mostly, mill and rolled and everything, but I found myself 5th overall in the second to last stage of the rally, a 2-day event, big long event through the deserts of Nevada, and I found myself 5th overall behind Hanu Mikula and I can't remember all the other names, but and that until second to last stage, same old thing. We're bouncing through the desert, it's kind of Baja sort of territory, and went over a jump and landed, and there was a big rock in the middle of the road, and my Atlas diff, the diff head crashed onto the rock, bent what we called a strongback, which was an aluminum plate that gave the diff strength. And we got an oil leak, basically. The rear gasket broke loose, and I started leaking diff oil and came out of the stage, looked under the car, saw all the oil, had no service, no oil, and we went into that second to last stage, and of course the diff seized halfway through. And that was another would have been, but
yeah, that's a shame.
Yes, but I recently it was quite thrilling. Some media coverage from Martin Holmes, who was a famous journalist back then, popped up within the last year, that we're talking 2026, that actually covered me and that event and had a picture of the car and talked about me running it up the top. So it took me 40 years to be recognised, but
you got there in the end.
I finally got something out of it.
If you're a fan of the podcast and you're interested in topics like engine tuning, automotive wiring, performance engine building, 3D modelling in CAD, or anything else in the high-performance industry, I have something that you might be interested in. Introducing the High Performance Academy VIP package. This package of courses gives you lifetime access to all of HPA's online training for one price. These courses cover everything from tuning and reflashing petrol and diesel engines, through to motorsport wiring, engine building, fabrication, design, car setup, and plenty more. Right now, you can get $500 off High Performance Academy's VIP package using the code PODCAST500 at checkout. Becoming a VIP means you'll never pay for another course again. You'll get instant access to all 40 plus courses we currently offer, plus every new course we ever release in the future. Want to define maps or tune with WinOLS? Curious about CAN bus devices, or how CAD can help make your dream build a reality? These in-depth topics, as well as many others, each have their own dedicated course that are going to help you master whatever it is you want to learn. And as a VIP member, you're not just getting the courses, you'll also join HPA's online community with lifetime access to our member forums and members' webinar lessons. Again, the code is podcast500 for that $500 discount. Just head over to hpacademy.com to check out the full VIP package and everything it contains. All right, let's get back to the episode.
So anyhow, that was it. So I realised now that, going back to what you said, how did I live? And I realised I'm not going to live.
No.
I'm running out of money.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. I'm not going to win any rallies, and I've got to come up with a plan B. So what happened is, it was really great timing. It was the boom of production-based showroom stock endurance racing in America. And a series started called the Playboy Endurance Series. Yes, sponsored by Playboy magazine. And I thought, well, how hard can it be driving a car around a racetrack when you get to see the turns and it's daylight?
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let me give that a shot. So I went, being a turbo guy, I managed to sell a rally car to a guy, collected the money, and I went out and bought a brand new Mitsubishi Starion ESI. So, in that 1985. So that was a 2.6 litre four-cylinder, the G54B, turbocharged with an intercooler. The I meant intercooler. It just came out on the 85 models. 84s didn't have them. So I looked at that and thought, man, that's fuel injected. How good is all this? So, rear-wheel drive, independent suspension, disc brakes all the way around. And I thought, that's the car for me. So I bought a brand new one, took it back to the Woodner, and got the rule book out and made it perfectly, blueprinted the motor, and it was right to the rules. And we got done just in time to get in, put our bag in the back, and drive for 3 days straight to San Francisco from Washington, D.C. So I managed to persuade a friend to come with me, and literally it was non-stop. It's nearly 2,800 miles.
Jeez, wow.
So 5,000 kilometers. So we had to get over there. And this was the shakedown for the car we'd just built. So anyway, I made it to Sears Point, and because I had an FIA rally license, they gave me a racing license. I'd never done a race in my life. But I mean,
It's interesting that they just give you that. I mean, obviously driving a car is similar, but yeah, there's a lot of differences in rules, etc., and formalities between circuit racing and rally.
Well, they were happy to have good entries, and they figured if this guy's got a world level rally license, he's probably pretty capable of driving a car. So, and it was true. So I went out on the track, and I went out in the car, and I was competitive, fairly competitive. Well, I was competitive with other Starians, but I learned the golden rule in professional showroom stock racing in America at that time, and I was trying to decide whether to share this, but some friends of mine at the time, the Archer brothers, Bobby Archer, came up to me, said, "Peter, there's only two kinds of people in this racing, the cheaters and the losers." And I listened to that, and then I worked out, well, how come my 175 horsepower Starion is getting the doors blown off down the back straight by a Dodge Shelby Charger that's meant to be 145 horsepower, and it's going by me like I'm standing still? And that's when I realized that, we were going to have to regroup. So we, finished the race, okay, and that took it back to Washington, another, 3-day drive home. We didn't have a trailer. I'd borrowed a pit crew and stuff in San Francisco, drove it back. It was still in one piece, and regroup. And next time we were out, we were a match. We'd learned what you have to do, and we did it, and I was fully competitive, and so competitive that the Mitsubishi factory team, a guy, a friend of mine still today, Dave Wallen, he had a team that was called Team Mitsubishi, and Dave invited me, figured if I could run competitively with them, then I should be driving for him. So, I guess this is really a turning point, because I found myself, we're getting paid to go racing.
It's quite a change around. Nice when the money flows the other way.
Absolutely.
I've got to dig into this. What made it competitive? Because you've sort of alluded to the fact it might not have entirely been within the rule book.
Well, I guess I did do that. The thing is, everybody was doing it.
Of course.
So it wasn't really cheating.
You're just getting on the same playing field.
That's right. So what I learned is it was up to the sanctioning bodies to regulate the rules. And they wanted a race. So they let cars that weren't as good do things to be competitive. And that, so, and nobody was going to say if you didn't win, if you lost, and you say, well, they were cheating. Nobody wanted to hear that. You had to win. So while it's tempting to get into some of the things, I probably shouldn't. Although the statute of limitations has certainly passed. But
I think you'd probably be just fine.
and the people that know, they're smiling too, because they know what they were doing. And that, so, you did no, there's no magic. I mean, obviously you had to get some more boost into it, and you had to get some more boost into it, because depending which series, I ran 2 series, but suspension was opened up, springs, shocks, sway bars.
Yeah, okay. So it's really the power, which is what you had to chase. And that's quite a while ago compared to current regulations. Did they have a boost limit, or what limits were put around what you could and couldn't do inside of the engine and the tuning?
They did. In later series, I ran more turbo cars, but they did. Electronic. There was a thing called a recording boost gauge, a boost recorder. So it was a black box that could data log boost, manifold pressure, and that. So. I only did this once or twice, I'll say. So to get around that, you had to run a hose from the intake manifold through the firewall into the car, and they connected the logger into the car and strapped it down to the floor. And I started scratching my head and thinking, okay, so we're allowed 13 pounds of boost. So I teed off into that hose back up into the firewall, put one of those pressure relief valves.
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't it be a hell of a shame if that line just happened to develop a small leak? Oh, that'd be a crying shame.
Well, better than that, it had a relief valve that popped off at 13. And so when they came in, or 12 or 13, so when they came in and downloaded my data, I used to have a beautifully smooth 13-pound curve. And that, so there was tricks like that. You had to be
think outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, think outside the box. So but anyhow, so we'll go past that. There's lots of more of those yarns to tell, but I probably said enough. And that, so well, anyhow, ran the 24 hours of Nelson Ledgers with Dave and Astarian. Teammate rolled it like 3 hours into the race. And, that Kiwi spirit persuaded Dave to get it back from the swamp and let's get it going again. So we spent about 45 minutes putting chicken mesh for a windscreen. There was no rear glass, and it mechanically was fine. So I got back in that sucker, and I was a second and a half lap faster than I had been in qualifying, because it was, probably 200 pounds lighter now with no glass and stuff. And I drove, what makes that story memorable for me is I drove 15 hours of a 24-hour race myself, personally.
Wow.
So I was doing 3 tanks of gas, like 4.5-hour stints in this thing, and just hot lapping, and unlapping, going past the car, driving through the field, doing a mini SVG, but over 15 hours, not 30 minutes. But so unlapping. So we worked our way back up to in the closing hours of the race, be in the podium.
Wow.
And that, because it's a brutal 24-hour race, production cars, a lot of people have trouble, this and that. Anyhow, Dave, I guess, was impressed with that, so he invited me to move to California. So I moved back from DC to California, worked for Dave Wallen Team Mitsubishi, and helped prepare the new Starion ESIRs, the wide body ones, which are lovely. So we had brand new red ones, and we built 87, 88, and I used all my expertise with that and to make sure it's competitive. Did a lot of testing, Willow Springs Raceway, and I was getting a paycheck for helping prep the cars and driving. And we did a lot of testing with Toyo. Now Toyo was brand new in the United States in 1986, so we used to go out to Willow Springs Raceway, which is a track in the plains of near Palmdale, where the space shuttle and NASA is, and spend whole days hot lapping Willow and testing, doing tire testing, and it was really great. It really helped my driving, and I went on to, then the season got underway 86, and I had my very first professional win. I won the Portland SCCA Escort Endurance race with my co-driver Dave Vega. And what made that special was it was the very first professional win in America for Toyo tires.
Oh, wow.
Back then, very first time they'd won a professional race. And so that they were pleased, and they did a lot of win ads, and I started getting publicity at that point. Still pre-internet, we're talking mid-80s.
Yeah.
And then, look, people say to me, Peter, how do you get a career in racing? And my answer to those people is contacts. Make contacts, okay?
Yeah, your network's so important.
Or bring lots of money of your own. So I didn't have the money, so I had to make contacts. Well, the guy that interviewed me at that Portland Escort race, working for the TV station at the time, I can't remember what it was, his name was Steve Potter. And Steve interviewed me, and that turned out to be the most important connection I have made in my life, frankly, to do with motorsport anyhow. So I met Steve, and Steve was, apart from being the TV commentator, was a celebrity, a media driver for John Woodner in the Peugeot 505 turbos, and in that same Escort Endurance Series, so with the Peugeot America support. So at the end of the race, after winning in the Mitsubishi, John asked me to go to dinner with him and invited me to come back to Washington, D.C. to the Woodner, take over the preparation and driving of the Peugeot factory team. And, I'd have my own shop, and I'd get paid, had a monthly budget to do it. And I did. So I unfortunately had to drop.
So backwards and forwards between Washington and Washington, D.C. and California.
Yeah. I had to abandon Dave, and I apologise for that, Dave, but it was probably the right thing for me to do. And I back to DC, and I got stuck into the 505 turbos, and we went back out in those. And I should point out that my co-drivers was John Woodner, of course, but most importantly Janet Guthrie. And Janet is famous for being the first woman to ever race in the Indy 500. So I was teammates with Janet, and she was very pleased that I'd come on board and got the cars competitive. And we had a pretty good season overall, and that was 86. 87, the Peugeot deal went away, and I told you Steve Potter would come into play. Well, Steve went out and promoted up some Dodge Ram race trucks. There was a brand new series called the Coors Race Truck Series. And Steve had really good contacts all through the automotive industry. He called his friend up, Dick Maxwell at Chrysler, and Dick gave us a couple of new Dodge Ram 50s and called his friends at Yokohama, and they agreed to supply us free tires. And so Steve called around all his contacts, promoted up a lot of stuff for the team, and Steve and I drove the race trucks in the 1987 Coors Race Truck Series, and that was probably a super competitive series. All the trucks were fairly equal, and that's where I learned to do bump drafting. We'd have like eight truck trains down the front straights, smacking into the back of each other, and NASCAR style. So that got me through that, but I wasn't getting paid. I was back to finding money myself, so I had to win. And I'll jump through that. But then that series, it still became difficult, financially difficult. So I bailed out, and I bought back those Peugeot 505 turbos that I'd run with Woodner the year before. And there was I saw a business opportunity. And back then, there was a lot of people with money that wanted to go racing, they had some money, wanted to go racing, but didn't have the resources to run their own team. And of course, logistics in America is massive. There's 2,000-3,000 miles between races. So I bought an old semi, and I loaded up 3 of these Peugeots in, and I was selling rental seats. So I had the first car for me and another good driver, and sometimes we had 2-3 drivers per car. So I made a business renting race cars. So, it still exists today. And I actually did very well with it because Peugeot had a contingency program that was lucrative. It paid like $5,000 for first finishing Peugeot, $3,000 for second finishing Peugeot, and $2,000 for third. So, and the series itself had really good prize money. So I was able to come away, and then on top of the rental money, I was able to come away with $20,000-$25,000 a race.
No, that's no joke.
which was, and that's back in the 80s, late 80s.
Yeah.
So that was like a gold mine at the time.
I'll tell you one thing's for sure, that doesn't happen in New Zealand.
No, I know. Well, many of the things I tell would never have happened to me in New Zealand. They just wouldn't. The country's too small, and that. So 88, 89 was the Peugeots making money, even enough money to buy a house, and I found a wife, and that put my name on the map, and it really established me. I made a lot of good contacts, and then 1990, because I had actually done so well overall, I was invited to drive for the Oldsmobile factory team, the Hacker brothers. So I went out and drove these old Calais, not very attractive looking cars, I might have to say. And they had the quad 4 engines in them, GM's first kind of twin cam 4-cylinder effort, and good support from Oldsmobile engineers involved. And I went out in 01 West Palm Beach Grand Prix Firehawk event, IMSA Firehawk event in that, and that put my name further up the pole. I was starting to be seen as a winning driver in the series. And that then a really great opportunity came in 1991. There was a brand new car company owned by General Motors called Saturn, and it was meant to be General Motors' attempt to compete with Honda. And we had these little cars called the Saturn SC Coupes, and they're a 1.9 litre 4-cylinder twin cam, 4-valve motors and front-wheel drive. And I teamed up with a guy, Dave Rosenblum, ICY Racing, and became partners with him, and I did the engine development on those and prepped the cars. But we had sponsorship from Valvoline Oil. I don't mean the guy down the road, Ashland Oil Company, Valvoline. And it was a part of the Valvoline Say No to Drugs program at that time. So and our cars were painted up in the blue and, the Valvoline factory colours. And then they also did the same with Al Unser Jr. and the IndyCar program, and I think Joe Amato and drag racing. So there was a different motorsport forms that all were a part of the Say No to Drugs Valvoline deal. So got the Saturns out on the track, and they were competitive. We were competing against the Honda factory teams back then with the Honda CRX SIs that had been dominating in the smaller categories. But I found myself with a competitive car, and I guess the bridge over real quick to technical stuff rather than just the racing. I did the engine development. I had support from the Saturn engineers, but I actually had to do the work. And that's when I set up, I'd bought a Stutzka 500 engine dyno from Woodner, from the Woodner estate. And so that was in the basement of my house in Manassas, Virginia. So it was a water break, and
Yeah. I'm guessing this is before proper digital control strategies as well. So it not like a modern dyno.
No, not at all. A water break, and but it gave me a tool to test and measure horsepower. So we got those running pretty good.
Well, actually, what at this point, what are you doing around the fuel injection system?
Well, I was, like I said, I had Saturn would ship me ECUs that they had tuned. They had probably Superflow dynos at that time. So one of the crew members was on the engine development team. So they were shipping me ECUs and stuff that had what they thought. And I still didn't have a wideband, so I just ran the ECU they gave me, basically. So I was more interested in the mechanical side of it because I was doing the nuts and bolts. I was doing the blueprinting of the engines and machine work and bolting them together. So
was there any sort of regulations around what you could and couldn't do to the engine outside of capacity?
Yeah, the same rule I told you earlier. Do what the other guys were doing.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Honda CRXs were going down the back straights besides Z28 Camaros.
Yeah, okay. So just don't get caught.
Don't get caught. But there was enforcement, but it's like I said, and it was really the sanctioning bodies that were keeping the playing field level. Bottom line is, my Saturns were equal. We were competitive with the Hondas, and they were faster sometimes, and we were faster sometimes. Both teams had excellent drivers, and it came down to the wire. And in fact, that let me get to that. I won, I think, 5 of the races. I won the first race in the world for Saturn, and that. And as the season went on, I was super competitive and won 5 of the races out of I think an 8-race or 9-race, maybe 9-race series. But the highlight of that, Dave had a great program going where we used high school kids from Philadelphia, the suburbs of Philadelphia, that maybe had, we were sort of role models to them, young kids that might have been otherwise getting into trouble and stuff, and that was, the Say No to Drugs theme. We had that crew, and so we got quite a bit of publicity from it. In fact, I guess I'll say when I won those races, Saturn were really pleased to see it's exactly what they wanted. Their GM Honda fighter was winning endurance races against Hondas. So they made, probably my first experience of getting really big publicity is Honda made billboards, those giant billboards, and they're on the side of the I-5 freeway in Los Angeles, and they did print ads, double-page print ads in 23 magazines, like Time Magazine, Newsweek, and, I still have copies of that today. But so I really got a lot of publicity in 91. It was the first time that my name was out there, kind of in major media. So that was really good. But the feature of that event was I got to co-drive with Al Unser Jr., and Al Unser Jr. was a top IndyCar driver at that time, and little Al was asked to be guest and team with me in the Watkins Glen 4-hour endurance race, and that, so I was probably in my prime as far as a driver goes at that point, or maybe 33 years old. And Al jumps in. He was there as a driver for IROC, International Race of Champions. So that's why he was at the event. But Al came over and drove in the Saturn with me. He had not driven one, and I remember going out with little Al, and he followed me in the second car, and I did hot laps around the Glen, and it took little Al about 3 laps following me to get down to the hot time, the second.
Showing his talent.
Yeah. So I think I qualified at the front in our class, and we were in racing against other faster cars as well, different classes. So bottom line is Al and I won the race. He gave me the car in the lead. I kept it in the lead, and we won a race. So that was really quite a satisfying experience for me to get to co-drive with an IndyCar driver,
I can imagine. At this point, sort of where are you sort of seeing the trajectory going? Are you sort of aiming to get to NASCAR or IndyCar or something of that nature? I'm assuming that's your drive.
Absolutely not.
Oh.
Something I learned at that point was and it was told to me by another experienced guy, I'd rather be the king of the shits than the shit of the kings. So what that meant is I was competing at a level that I could pull the resources together to be a winner and a champion. And, at that point, the logical step would have been to try to go to Trans Am or something like that. But I didn't have the money and to do that. And I'd found a niche where people were prepared to pay me. Like I've told you, I was able to get deals from car manufacturers, and I made my name and reputation as a competent car preparer and a champion driver.
Yeah, it's a good combination.
I was able to get deals and pull the resources together. So I knew that if I tried to go further, that I would burn out. I wouldn't have the resources. But anyhow, the grand finale, I'm here finally after all of that. It was 1992, and we get back to that name, Steve Potter, again. Well, by this time, Steve had become the public relations manager for Mazda North America on the East Coast. And Steve and I were really good friends. He had been the best man at my wedding, all that good stuff. And we'd co-driven the race trucks together. Well, Steve's now in a position at Mazda where he can help me. And what he did to help me is he hired me, the public relations department hired me to help with the product launches of new Mazdas. So they were called long lead press events. So all the media would be invited to drive the cars like 3 months before launch, because it takes them 3 months to write a story for Car and Driver, Road and Track, all those magazines. So Steve hired me to help with the logistics of the cars for these press events. And what that did is I got to meet all the senior management of Mazda worldwide, frankly. And it was the end of 1991. It was time for the launch of, I helped with the Miata, the MX-5 launch. That was massive, but I didn't walk away from that with a race deal, so we'll skip that one. But it was now time for the FD RX-7 launch, and that was held in Asheville, North Carolina, at the Grove Park Inn, in September of 1991. Okay, 91. And these were 93 cars. So it was very early. And that was a long lead, and all the top automotive media in the United States and Canada were there, and all the senior management of Mazda were there, including a guy named Kobayakawa, who was the head of Mazda Speed at that point in time, and also the father of the FD RX7. He was the top guy at Hiroshima that managed the development of the FD RX7. So Kobe was there, and I became good friends with Kobe at that event. I spent like almost 3 weeks living at that Grove Park Inn and having dinners with Kobe, taking him out for sushi. And he was a great guy, and I got to meet everybody. The president of Mazda was there, so found myself at tables, with senior management. This is a guy who wants a race car deal. It's a pretty good table to sit at. I'm in the right spot. So anyhow, we played that out, and the event went well. And I met all the journalists, Chubba Cheddar, Tony Swan, Rich Sepos, all the editors of all the top magazines were all with us at those dinners. So, it was a really phenomenal networking opportunity. Thank you, Steve. So here's the funny part. At the end it was coming to an end, and Kobe pulled me aside at one of those dinners and said, "Peter, son," he says, "why don't you get Steve to help write a proposal for you to race the RX-7 in the IMSA Supercar Series next year?" And I thought, Kobe, bloody good idea. So I can hardly, leave the table fast enough, and I bolt back, and we huddle in a motel room and in the hotel room. And my good friend Steve is an excellent writer. So we sit down and we write a very detailed, well-written proposal to field a fleet of Batties in the IMSA Supercar Series in 1992. So that got passed out at the event to all the senior management of Mazda America, all the VPs, the president. And so I was there to smile while they were reading it almost, So I did a pretty thorough public relations job myself and managed to get tremendous support.
This would have also been kind of the height of the win on Sunday, sell on Monday sort of part of motor racing, wouldn't it?
Yes, it definitely was. And in that series, there was strong manufacturer involvement. Porsche factory team, Brumos Porsche, Hans Stuck, Hurley Hayward, Walter Roll drove the Porsche turbos. And, Chevrolet, Corvettes, Lotus, factory Lotus team with the Lotus Esprit X180R, which was a specialty Lotus Esprit that was built for racing, and 300ZX twin turbos, Supra turbos. They weren't competitive, but a car called the Consigliere, which was a very lightweight special. The Porsches, the Lotuses, the Corvettes, all the high performance cars of the early 90s were there.
So what in terms of developing this FD RX7 platform, obviously now it's got a rich history in road racing. Did you have, obviously it's brand new at this point though, so did you have any support from maybe teams in Japan that had developed it into a race car, or are you just figuring it all out for yourself?
No, I was first. I mean, so we're talking, so after that press event, let me quickly wrap that one up, but at that we had 5 brand new FDs for the press, 3 yellow ones, by the way, competition yellow mica, which are gold now. They only made 300. So at the end of the event, I got to take all 5 cars back to my shop, brand new RX-7s, and keep them for free. Kobe wanted this to happen, and there was another division, the Mazda America's motorsport division, were doing the GTP car, the famous silver blue 4-rotor GTP car. So that was the primary focus of Mazda North America's racing program. So I sort of came in on the coattails of that. In fact, to be truthful, the guy that was running that, his name was Dick St. Ives, he did not want my program to happen because he didn't want the budget to be diverted from the GTP program, and he really was against it. But fortunately for me, I had Kobe backing me, and Kobe had what it took to overhaul everything. In fact, I was later told that Kobe had gone to Japan and asked the Vice President of Marketing of America, and went up to her, Jan Thompson, and said, "So, Jan, I hope we're going to be racing the RX-7 in the IMSA Supercar Series with Peter Farrell next year." And she says, well, because Dick had been PRing her not to do it. And she went, "Oh, yes, sir. Oh, yeah, we'll do that." So basically it was ordered from Kobe to do it. So next thing I knew, I had 5 brand new RX-7s, and I had, what ended up being nearly $1 million of resources to run a racing campaign, including an 18-wheeler, tractor trailer that was the spare Mazda motorsport rig was given to me. And I had a free parts budget, so I could call up the parts distribution centres and say, "Send me 3 sets of turbos, Federal Express overnight, please." Just put it on the tab. And that's where the dealers order the parts from.
Wow.
So, I just had unlimited parts, cars and money. And, we all had to run Bridgestone Expedia tyres. It was a spec tyre series. I love Bridgestone, but in all honesty, that kind of ruined the series because the tyres sucked. They were rock hard compound. Not that Bridgestone tyres are excellent, but
that particular one. There
was a special compound for the series, and when they did the tyre testing, they thought there was going to be Corvette ZR1s racing, and they knew they had to be able, and they were going to be longer races, like 3 hours. So the compound they used, and we all had the same compound, and the series ended up being 45-minute races, and I had a lightweight RX-7. So the race tyres were actually slower than the tyres that the car came from the showroom on.
Oh, God. So you've got a tyre that essentially would do a whole season of racing.
Well, yeah, they just didn't have much grip. And what that did is it made the series very challenging, should I say. I mean, and even the Porsche guys, Hans Stuck used to say, "These are some very interesting tyres," I might say. So we didn't want to badmouth them, but they were really, the cars were difficult to drive, and that because they had poor grip. Well, we all had the same tyre, of course, but the 911 turbos were better because they had the weight over the rear axle, and so I struggled a bit getting the cars to be competitive because of the lack of grip. All of that came together 3 weeks before the first race, which was the Miami Grand Prix. So I had gone from, being on a shoestring race budget all my life.
To factory backed.
Factory backed, everything I could dream of, but I only had 3 weeks to put 3 cars on the grid in Miami.
Geez, that's a tight time frame.
It sure is. And that brings me to another Kiwi named Mitch Piper. was working with my brother back in New Zealand, and he heard I'd had a race deal, and I get this call from Mitch, who was cleaning boats in Long Beach Harbour, and he says, "Oh, my dad works with your brother," and that he says, "I was wondering if you got any jobs over there." And I says, "Well, what's your skills?" He says, "Oh, well, I'm a A-grade mechanic, and I like rotaries." And I said, "How fast can you get to the airport? Can you come on the red eye?" And he literally went home, packed his bags, got on the red eye from California to Washington overnight, that same night. And he went on to work for me for several years and was a key guy in making my racing program successful. And he still lives there to this day, actually, and has his own race fabrication business. So we managed to get the cars to Miami. And I was really lucky there because the GTP cars were really behind on development. And Mazda had thrown a big dealer meeting. They had like 300 Mazda dealers at this huge hospitality suite at the Miami Grand Prix, big catered, spreads and stuff. Well, the GTP cars had caught on fire the day before at the test at Charlotte. Testing, the hot exhaust system was burning the carbon fiber bodywork. So they weren't able to be at the race. So Clark Vitulli was the president of Mazda America, and he came over to my truck and said, "Peter, look, I got 300 dealers over there meant to be looking at race cars, and they aren't here. Would you bring your RX-7s over to the big team, the A team?" And I did, and that was like the best feather in my cap because it saved the day at Mazda America, so they weren't embarrassed with all their dealers, who, of course, are the most important people that exist for them.
Sure. And you end up looking like a hero, saving the day.
I was. It really reinforced my program as being valuable to them. But shortly thereafter, this is probably one of the most memorable things of my motorsport career, is Kobe arranged for me to fly to Japan, to Hiroshima. And he set me up in a conference room at a big table with all the heads of departments for the FD RX7. So on my left was was Kojima, who designed the suspension. Next to him was the head engine development guy, and then there was the head of brake department there. So I had all these engineers at a table in front of me that were there to just answer my questions.
Wow.
So I had about a 1 hour or maybe 45-minute conference with the creators of the car at the factory at Hiroshima. So that was bloody cool, I might say.
Yeah, that's stuff that just doesn't really happen.
No, it was just amazing. And then I went out in a Cosmo 20B around the Mazda test track, etc. So wonderful memories. I got to meet just all the iconic people of the early 90s Mazda. In both Japan and in America.
Just to dive into some of the specifics around developing a car like this, I guess, how do I put this in a politically correct way? The rotary engine is probably not globally renowned for its reliability. And I think a lot of that is because of people not understanding how to build them and not understanding how to tune them. But that still is the situation we've got. They've got sort of a bit of a reputation for maybe not being that reliable. How much of a problem was that, and what needed to be addressed to make these cars reliable and fast?
Yeah, what you said is true. That's a good question, and I do have the answer. And that answer is cooling. The key to making a rotary work properly is keeping it cool. So Downing helped me get some good oil coolers on it with proper ducting. A simple thing that so many people overlook, even today. An intercooler, an oil cooler, a radiator is only effective as the amount of air that's flowing over it. It's a heat exchanger. So I learned about ducting. So I made sure my oil coolers had great airflow. I made sure my radiator had great airflow. And I made sure the intercooler was getting proper airflow. And that helped a lot. And the rules were fairly restrictive, so-called, similar to what I said. But I was very fortunate to have ECUs from Japan that had the chip, had some changes, not to boost. They were very careful not to do things that they thought could be breaking the rules. But the sequential turbos used to switch over at 4,300 and they would pre-spool, and then 45, the second turbo would come online. So they dropped that down to $3,000 because they wanted me in twin turbo mode all the time. So I wasn't going through the transition from primary to secondary.
Oh, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so because that gives you a big dip in the torque curve.
So that put that dip in the torque curve essentially out of the RPM range you're actually using on a racetrack.
That's right. So that helped. And also something that was gold dust in those days is the FD had a overboost cut at like 12 pounds or 11.5 pounds. So, shut the fuel off if you went over 11.5 pounds. And that, so in those days there was nothing to deal with that. So I managed to get some ECUs out of Japan that had the fuel cut removed, basically. So so we could run the boost out till we ran out of injector, basically. So that was extremely helpful. But although we really didn't run much boost as such at that point, so I had reliability. There were some challenges to do with the sequential turbo hoses, those famous the rat's nest 73 rubber hoses that come off and stop the sequential from working properly. So we had a learning curve there, and we were the first ones to do this and to deal with this. Oh, that reminds me, actually, to pop back to a question from a few minutes ago. You said, were we able to tap into Japanese teams and stuff? The answer is no. We were the first. I'm not saying that the famous Amamirs and this weren't playing with them, but
the sort of parallel development, essentially. They're learning at the same time you are.
Yeah. Right, this is extremely early days. In fact, it kind of, to bring it back down to the southern hemisphere here, it was a time that Mazda Australia was running their cars in the endurance series, those BP sponsored cars.
Yeah, they were incredibly successful, weren't they?
They were. Well, Alan Horsley, I got a call from Alan Horsley in Virginia, my shop, and he, picking my brain, and that I was a little bit ahead of them, and I sold them brake pads and some other parts, and so I was actually helping them. They were using my stuff from the States. Or in fact, Alan invited me to come and drive on the team at Eastern Creek, or maybe it was Bathurst, in their team, and I was kind of excited to do that, but it was really tight timing for me. And I think a couple of weeks before the race, I got a call from him and said, "Look, Peter, it's really tight for you, and it's probably best that," he says, "I've got Alan Jones, ex-Formula One champion, driver that wants to do it. So, we're going to sub Alan instead of you." I said, "Well, I understand." So I didn't do it. And actually, I regret it today, because it would have been really cool to actually have had the bragging rights to say I'd driven the factory Mazda team at Bathurst and all that stuff. But it didn't happen. But I did get invited. So there was I was the first. There was nobody for me to pick their brain but I had the support of Mazda Japan, and we got a little bit of help there, like I said, with the ECUs. I had good suspension. I had Penske double adjustable suspension. That was when Penske were just getting into the shock absorber business. So because I was the Mazda factory team, we had Penske engineers come to the track with us to help dial in the shocks, and we had Bridgestone tire engineers come to help us with the tire testing and that. So just good resources and our own efforts. I mean,
just on the ECU front, obviously now we're talking sort of early 90s, and aftermarket standalones definitely were a thing, although somewhat problematic to put on a sequential twin turbo FD anyway. But is the rules around not being able to replace the ECU just the fact you say you're using Mazda tunes or Mazda ECUs?
Right. Well, see, that was in 92 and 93, but as the series evolved, the other cars, the Porsches, were basically they were making 600 plus horsepower. The evolution of the rules increased dramatically, and the cars were all a lot faster, a lot more powerful. And they let us be more powerful. So they let me go single turbo.
Right.
So I ended up with a T78 Greddy kit on mine. And of course we didn't use the factory management. I had a electromotive, I think it was a Tech 2.
Yeah.
And I had a Tech 2, and, we were up on horsepower. We were up, the 455 horsepower at this point. on these horrible tyres. But I was allowed to go to big wheels. I went to 10-inch, 17-inch, 10-inch on the rear, 275s. So I had a lot more rubber under it, and we were allowed to have Brembo brakes in the front. So it sort of really stepped up.
You're no longer really a production race series.
Well, really, to be truthful, it was getting up a little bit like Group A cars I see from like the Commodores and stuff, but not quite as far as that, but along those sort of lines. Big brakes, lots of horsepower,
Yeah.
But stock, no transaxles or anything, no close ratio boxes. Well, in my car, the BMW guys at the time did. The BMW 5 Series had the European transaxles in them because they were struggling to be competitive, and IMSA let them put these Hewland transaxles in them. So we had FD with a stock FD transmission racing a BMW with a Hewland in it.
Yeah, that doesn't really seem like a fair fight.
Well, it wasn't, but we were actually about equal. So it made them competitive, kept them in the series. So anyhow, that's the racing of the RX-7. So I've told that story pretty well. And I think I probably should bridge over to the performance products business at this point.
Yeah, naturally. Oh, actually, but before you do that, when you sort of, I think you said 450, 500 horsepower you were getting once you went to that single turbo kit?
400 wheel horsepower, yeah.
Okay, because I was sort of thinking 450, 500 horsepower under race conditions with a stock 5-speed gearbox probably isn't a match made in heaven.
Well, look, and honestly, Andres, I hear that in New Zealand now these days, and people rubbishing, the Mazda diffs and gearboxes, and they were good to me.
Okay.
And we'll get into drag racing. If you're kind to them, they're actually pretty good. The weakest link of an FD gearbox is when we did the 20B 3-rotor single turbo conversions. We were breaking the teeth off third gear.
Okay.
But that was torque doing that. But if the rest of it in the road racing, they held up pretty well, and but I was kind to them. And same with the diffs. I mean, I went 9.9 at 140 miles an hour in the quarter mile, a 137 60 foot time on a completely stock FD driveline, stock gearbox, power plant frame, and stock diff with a Torsen.
That's impressive.
And
yeah.
I've got the time slips for that. That's a given. But I broke axles because we were almost doing a wheel stand, so I had to go to chrome moly axles. But the actual diffs, and I think I take credit for being the creator of the diff girdle on the FDs. So I was the first that I know of to snap the snout off the FD diff casing, doing a 60 foot, doing a drag launch. And so we took it back to the shop, and I looked hard and I saw where it broke, and I thought, my God, look at that diff casing. It's only, an eighth of an inch thick where it snapped. There's no material in that diff. And because it's a power plant frame rigidly connected to the gearbox, rigidly connected to the front of the diff, all that torque is going through the nose of the diff casing.
Yeah.
So I worked out, well, hang on, it's not very strong, so we better bypass that baby. So we manufactured a steel-plated girdle that took the load from the front mounting bolts and bypassed the diff and went straight up to the subframe. So none of the torque went through the diff casing. And I never broke another one. And they're still sold. I see them all over the world being sold today. And I think we made the first one. And that I never marketed them, but that solved the breaking the diff case problem.
Yeah, I think you did right, though. A lot of the reliability of drivetrain does come down to how you treat them. And it's interesting for me, you can have two drivers that are essentially just as fast as each other, and one will be lunching a gearbox every second race meeting, and the other will go a season of racing and the gearbox will be just fine.
No, you're absolutely right. And now there's a reason for this. Remember, my whole heritage was endurance racing. So production-based endurance racing, my whole racing career. So in that, it's just as important. You've got to have a car that's still running to win a race at the end
Absolutely.
of 6, 12, 24 hours. I've done, I think, 8 or 10 24-hour races.
So mechanical sympathy was basically built into you.
Absolutely. And that's why I enjoyed durability. And I'm pretty easy on it. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't shift fast and hard, but I'm sympathetic to what I'm doing to the mechanicals of the car. But I'll tell you what, skipping back to the engine management part. So fortunately for me, my shop I was next door neighbours to Electromotive,
Oh,
who
right.
were the designer of the Tech 2, Tech 1, Tech 2, Tech 3. So we were neighbours. So I tapped into them, and Jim Long was the son of the founder, Alex. So, I learned a lot about engine management systems. That was the beginning of it for me. But in fact, I put a couple on my boat. I had a big fountain boat with two 502 big blocks. So we even put Tech 3s on those because I was intrigued with the fact you could hook up a laptop and do data logging and stuff. It goes back to what we spoke about earlier on. This was just magic stuff. Here we were able to use a laptop and change the ignition and measure the air fuel ratio and change so it was just things, the dreams of those early 80s for me.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I got to learn a lot about engine management systems by being neighbours with Electromotive, and that in fact I hired a young guy, Russell. Russell came to me to buy some parts, and I sold him some parts. And when he was walking out the door, he says, "Oh, I made my own engine management system for my 240Z." And I said, "Hang on, come back here, take a seat." I said, "Well, what's this about?" And he was an electrical engineer. He just got his degree at Virginia Tech or something, top college. And I said, "Well, how about you come and work for me?" He was looking for a job. I said, "Come and work for me." So he came and worked for me at PFS, Peter Farrell Supercars. After a year or so, I just learnt so much from Russell. And Electromotive scalped him from me. And he actually went over to work for Electromotive. And he's the designer of the Tech 3, the Tech 3, which was their more modernized version. Well, Russell did the electrical engineering side of that and all the prototyping and some of the software development. So I had a close friend who was a engine management designer. And we're talking about 2000 at this point, 2001 maybe. And Russell actually is still very successful over there with his own company, Powertrain Control Solutions. He was one of the early guys to do laptop tunable automatic transmission control and stuff.
Right.
And that got me, once again, I made contacts, and that actually taught me a lot about engine management. And about that time I bought my first dyno, a dyno jet. So I had a dyno jet, I had a wideband, a big boxy thing, but it measured air fuel ratio. It was one of the first.
So you finally move away from relying on just EGT.
That's right. So I had a dyno jet, I had a wideband, I had an engine management system that was laptop programmable. I had the engine management company next door. So we were on a roll. That's about the time I took the FD into drag racing. Probably more interesting to some of your listeners, but I'm a guy that looks for the boom, the sweet spot in motorsport. So my road racing career had sort of started to slow down. The Japanese economy had collapsed, and deals were getting harder to come by. And so I got into, Kip Kington was the editor of Turbo magazine back then. And I'd just run the Long Beach Grand Prix in the supercar, one of my last events. This is 1995, in the supercar, and I think finished third there. And Kip says, "Hey, we're going to there's an event, a NYRA drag racing event at Palmdale this next weekend. Why don't you stay over and bring the RX-7 up and run it down the quarter mile?" And I thought, "Oh, that sounds sort of like fun." And I'd been sponsoring a guy named Adam Sarataru in an FD that was really...
Oh, he's one of the old names from the drag scene.
Well, he used to have big PFS on the side, and that he had all my products. So I went over there. Adam was there. He loaned me a set of 10-inch slicks, and I bolted the big wing off the back of the road race car and put the slicks on, and just had stock FD wheels on the front and cranked the boost up. And what else did we do? I softened up played with the shock valving a little bit, and I pull up on the line, and I had to wave someone over, Adam over. "Hey, what do I do? When do you go?" So, he told me about the Christmas tree. So next thing, looked at the oranges, and I saw a green, and away I went. And so my very first pass down the quarter mile was an 11.2 in a Batty at like 1:30 or something. My first pass down the course. That was fast back then, believe me.
Interestingly enough, I built, I guess my reputation sort of built off drag racing with my old Evo 3 that had the world record.
Yeah.
And that went 8.2 at 180 mile an hour ultimately. And I built that up, and the whole reason I got into it was at the time the New Zealand drag scene with the Ford Rotary Nationals. There was a few guys floating around that were running in the 11s. One guy had a GTIR Nissan Pulsar. There's a couple of GTR R32 GTRs and a couple of Evos. And I sort of looked at it, I thought, shit, it can't be that hard to run a 10. And I'd been following what was going on with the Talon Eclipses in the US, and I ended up with a Mitsubishi Evo 3 and built that up. And I don't really know how much power I needed, so I think at the time to start with it might have had 450 horse or something like that. And the very first event that I went to, I think I might have run an 11.2 or 11.3 on my first pass, and then my second ever pass on the drag strip was a 10.8, which it was a bit of a hollow victory. I'm like, oh, well, I built that whole car to run a 10, and it did it on its second ever event. So now what? But of course, that's the bug of drag racing, is there's always that next bracket to go down to. Oh, well, obviously if I've got a 10, now we need to run a 9, now we need to run an 8, and ultimately I was trying to shoot for 7s, but ran out of my frustration levels peaked before I managed to get there.
I can understand that. That's a little bit. My drag racing career was very short-lived. That got me going, and then the next year I got a bit more serious. It was still the road race car. We stripped it out, and we still had the stock driveline, stock transmission and diff and all that stuff. But I managed to get down. What I found is I was getting like 2-minute live interviews on ESPN. I was getting way more television exposure than I ever got when I was a road racer, because it was the big deal right then, import drag racing.
Yeah.
And I was invited to the battle, domestic versus import battles at MIR, Maryland International Raceway. And
I think it's probably fair to say that that's now shifted to drifting.
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
And but I thought, hey, this is easy. I mean, I burned 5 gallons of gas. I'm using the same tyres I had at the last event. So I couldn't believe it. The amount of, I could win, and I was getting a huge publicity, and I was spending nothing to do it.
Yeah, pretty easy on fuel and brake pads, but...
Yeah, well, speaking of fuel, the secret sauce then was VPC16.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
And that VP16 let me run boost.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the numbers it took. At my best, I went 9.98 at 140 miles an hour and a 137.60 foot time with a completely stock driveline.
That's impressive for a stock driveline.
It is, yeah. And that was no nitrous, and that was just, a street port 13B with a T78 or equivalent. I think it's maybe I had another turbo, but it's similar to a T78, same manifold, and C16 and tuned to 25 pounds of boost.
Yeah, that C16 or those proper race fuels was such an unlock, and we were going through that same thing in the late 90s with learning how to get these Mitsubishis to go down the drag strip fast. And in the end, VP came out with Q16, which was oxygenated, so that was just another level above the C16, but such a good fuel. And weirdly, I actually still miss the smell of it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's
probably not good for your health, but
it's probably $50 a gallon these days. But
oh, I hate to think.
But this kind of bridges back to way back when you were asking about rotor reliability, and that was the other thing. Apart from cooling, I learned detonation. The two killers of a rotary engine is heat, overheating, and detonation. So with C16, basically you can't make that stuff detonate. You've got to go way out of limits. So I was able to run, 25 pounds of boost on C16 and make, I believe, about 500 rear wheel horsepower, something like that, on my Dynajet. And that let me go down the quarter mile at 9.9 at 140, and, it was lots of fun. But anyhow, I quit that. I think we'd probably be wise to get over to the performance products business at this point.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, skipping back to that 1992, where I was in the prime of racing the factory, a 3-car RX-7 FD IMSA race team, IMSA Supercar team, 3-car team, myself, Willie Lewis, and the third car was journalists. Editors of all the magazines and stuff came and drove. So I was, making my name a little bit there. And one day I got a call at the race shop from a guy by the name of Mike Levitas. And Mike was a Porsche racer at that point and a turbo guy. He owned a company named Turbo Performance Center, TPC. He now actually owns DS Sport, the programmable shock absorber suspension company.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So anyhow, Mike calls me up and he says, Peter, you're getting, this racing these FDs. He says, well, I've got one. I really like them. He says, why don't we do some performance products for them? I said, oh, Mike, look, I'm so busy with the race cars. I don't know too much about that performance products business. And then he says, well, look, let's be partners in it. And he says, I do. And he says, and we'll be partners in it. And I thought, well, give me a few days to think about it. And so I did. And I thought, well, I don't know how long this whole racing gig's going to last. So maybe I better look at another way to feed the family. And so I called him back and said, yeah. So we get together, and that was the beginning of Peter Farrell Supercars. And the word supercars came from the IMSA Supercar race program. So it's Peter Farrell Supercars, PFS, and I got another FD off Mazda, and we painted it fuchsia pink and put all of the PFS products on that we were developing, and a different nose and a wing and intercoolers and stuff. Took it to SEMA. So we bought a booth at SEMA in, I'd say, 1993. And I think I'm the first person to bring an FD RX-7 to the SEMA show, and I'm sure there's been hundreds of them since.
I would imagine you're dead right.
But Mike was very smart technically and very good with turbos, and he was, clipping wheels and all this sort of stuff back then, modifying production turbos to work and that. But Mike, once again, contacts. So we went to SEMA, and Mike introduced me to the right people. George Spears, he was an intercooler guy, and I already had that. And Doug, most importantly, Doug Wallace. He was friends with Doug, and Doug was running that 300ZX twin turbo in the Supercar series I mentioned earlier. But Doug was an electronic genius at that time, and he had a device called the Crane Interceptor, and which was a piggyback computer that he had designed and was being sold through Crane cams for the 5.0 Mustangs.
I think I even remember that product. Never used one, but I remember.
Yep. Well, it was a computer, a microprocessor-based computer, and, well, it worked on the Mustang. But I got Doug involved to do a development for the RX-7, which had no engine management options at that point, other than the HKS FCON. That was the only thing, but they weren't great, frankly, at that point.
Is that sort of even pre-Power FC days?
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Power FC was not around at that point. Probably in R&D in Japan, though.
Sure.
And so it was either standalone or, So Doug, we co-developed that together. Like, he made a handmade wiring harness, shipped it to me. We put it on an RX-7, and Doug redid the hardware and the software in the Interceptor, the Crane Interceptor. And basically, we created what became known as the PFS Purple Box. And what it did is it intercepted the signal from the factory computer for pulse width, and it could recalculate an offset, either plus or minus, milliseconds. So it intercepted the injector outputs from the factory PCM, and also the ignition. And also boost to the boost control valves. So we had a keypad, a little handheld keypad that had a digital display and had buttons on it, and we could add percentage, like plus 2% fuel, plus 4%, whatever you wanted, or subtract. So it gave us capability to control the pulse width of the injectors and the ignition timing, and some other things. And it had a digital display of pulse width, etc. So that was a very breakthrough device at that point. And we were able to, therefore, remember I told you that the factory ECU had a clamp on boost at about 12 psi. So that meant nobody could go over 12 psi or the injectors shut off. So the PFS computer, though, Doug clamped the map sensor input to never go over that 12 psi. So the factory, and then we were able to add the compensation fuel after 12 psi by adding percentage to pulse width and ignition. You follow what I'm saying, of course?
Yeah. I guess that begs the question. I guess this was interceptors back then were probably quite popular compared to we don't really see them now. It begs the question, if you've got this capability with an electronics engineer, why go that interceptor route rather than just develop essentially your own standalone?
Oh, because of cost and simplicity. This was a plug-in device. I sold about 700 or 800 of these things.
Wow.
I mean, they're still trading on the forums today. You hear people talk about the iconic Peter Farrell computer. You had a guest recently that was schooling you on it. We were the only game in town at that point, and cost. So I was able to, I talked about the other hardware. We did our own intercooler, PFS intercooler. Spearco mass produced them for me. We did a prototype, used a really good Blackstone core. I paid the money to do cast tanks, end tanks, and tubing. So they're with my logo. I still have one today. So it was good, high quality stuff, and it worked very well. Most importantly, I'll come back to a point I made earlier. We did the work to make a proper duct. So I made the molds to make a fiberglass duct that scooped the air from the nose and mechanically attached to the intercooler. So all the air that went through the intake of the intercooler duct went through the core.
You have already mentioned the ducting, but it is worth just reiterating. I think people just don't realize how lazy air is. And if you give it a way of going around an intercooler core, or a radiator for that matter, it's going to. So ducting right up to that core to force that air through it, the effect or the improvement on the efficiency and effectiveness is just hard to believe unless you've actually tested pre and post.
And the shocking thing, and I'm sure you've pounded away on your webinars, etc. But I still see it today, the year 2026. I still see people with giant big intercoolers with no airflow, with piss poor ducting.
Yeah.
And same with radiators and stuff. They have an overheating, so they keep putting in bigger radiators. So just put a decent duct on the one you've got. I'll give you probably 30% improvement.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so we to our credit, we were smart enough then to know this. And that's from racing. I knew from racing that you had to get proper airflow over your heat exchangers. So all my PFS streetcar consumer product was engineered very well from that point of view. We had proper duct work. I still see people, and even the big names at that time, HKS and Greddy, they were hanging an air filter on the front of the turbo there and sucking air off the back of the radiator. And whereas my intake, the PFS intake, was getting the air out of that intercooler duct. So it was cold air. And so all that stuff made a difference, and it made my stuff work very well. And to go back to your original question, is I had a package. I had a bolt-on package that we could put on a FedEx truck or a UPS truck and ship it right across the country to someone. And any shop with basic skills could install and bump that batty from 255 horsepower to 360.
Wow, that's no joke.
Oh yeah, we'll crank the boost up 15 pounds. And my computer just unplugged. It was a matter of unplugging the 4 connectors on the factory ECU, plugging in our adapter harness, plugging the factory plugs back into the other side of that connector. And it was connected to that purple computer, which gave you control of the engine management. So anybody could do that. And then the intercooler intake was all designed to work in the existing engine bay without any fabrication or anything like that. It was all nice, bolt-in, easy to install stuff. And then we had an exhaust, had a fantastic exhaust, a 3-inch high-flow exhaust that I was very proud of. And it wasn't loud and raspy and stuff. It had a deep, throaty sound. And I told you about SEMA. It's a quality piece, probably the most high-quality piece that was sold. And that was because I met a company called Dynaflex, which was a truck. They made those big chrome stacks for Kenworths and stuff. I met them at SEMA. So I sent them our prototype piece, and they set up mass production. And it was all built on, CNC welders and, top-notch quality stainless steel was used. These things are invincible. I mean, I've never heard of one going rusty. And people like them even today. I see them for sale. And they talk of them like they're antiques, but they're still a good piece. So
they last.
Yeah, they last. So anyhow, we developed a good product line that was easy to install, and I sort of cornered the early FD RX7 market in the United States for sure. And it was a year or so later that the Japanese big names came on with the Power FC, and that's when standalones AIM was developing a piece. They did. AIM did a computer. So computers were getting more sophisticated, just straight out PCs and stuff. So computing power was much more available. And in hindsight, the weakness of the Purple Box, I want to say that some gave it a bad name, called it the Peter Motor Eater. And that was basically because they didn't know how to use it properly. And I will concede that it's probably not the most, it was a fairly weak processor and stuff, because we're talking 80s stuff. So the accuracy of those changes and percentages may not have been, not as precise as what they would be today. So you had to be careful what you did. And that, So, but anyhow, moving past that. So the product line, I ended up buying Mike out, I was saying, after a year or so. And I actually made a living for a decade in the RX-7 Batty performance products market. And I had customers all over the world, Italy, Greece, maybe a couple in New Zealand and the United States. And because of all those good connections I'd made with the magazines back in those race days, I was able to get feature stories in all the top automotive magazines in the country. That
network just comes up again and again and again.
Yep. And I built projects cars that went in the Super Tuner Challenge, went up against, John Lingenfelter, the iconic Corvette guy, and Auto Authority Porsches, and Chuck Mallett's Corvette, and Rentec Mercedes. So I went in a lot. So I got cover stories on massive magazines. So that really helped the PFS name back in those days. So, but all good things do come to an end. And I saw the writing on the wall in the late 90s that the FD went off the market in America in 95.
Yeah.
And then your Series 7s and 8s were revised. So a lot of my wouldn't work, and there was better stuff. The Power FC was a fantastic piece. And I'm first to say that, I'd unplug the Purple Box and plug one of those on any day.
Oh, I mean, there's no comparison between a proper, am I going to call a Power FC a proper standalone? I guess essentially it still is, versus an Interceptor. I mean, they're different tools for different jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah, one's 80s, one's late 90s.
And interestingly, though, even looking now with the popularity of the FD RX7, there's very, very limited options if you want to run a standalone and retain the factory sequential twin turbo system. And I guess that's the complexity of controlling that rat's nest that you referred to before with the solenoid block. I guess you could argue, though, at the same point, if someone's going to get to a point of being serious enough to put a standalone in it, chances are they've probably also gone to single turbo. Not always, but yeah, I guess that's where the ECU manufacturers decided that the juice on that wasn't worth the squeeze.
Well, you brought up the rat's nest, and I've got to eat up 30 seconds here, or even 1 minute on this story.
Yeah, go on.
I had a guy in Greece, okay, that had an RX-7, very rare in Europe, very, very rare. And he spent a year the turbos weren't working properly.
Yeah.
So he spent a year trying to get someone to fix it in Greece. And in frustration, he read one of those magazines with my name in it. He calls me up from Greece and asks me Turkey, got wrong country, Turkey. And he calls me up and tells me the sob story about how everybody in the country had a go trying to fix this RX-7. They couldn't. And would I fix it for him? I said, sure. He says, I'm going to ship it over. So he shipped it all the way from Turkey to Washington, D.C., Virginia.
Gee, wow.
And he called me up at about 10:30 in the morning. He says, I've just talked to the shippers and they're delivering the car to you about noon today. And that's so expected. I says, fine. I can't remember his name now. So at noon, the car arrives and I put it in the shop. The boys bring it in the shop, pull the hood up. Well, they move all the hoses around to the right place, put the hood back down, drive up the road, and away she went. So I called him back an hour later and said, hey, have them come back and pick it up, take it back to Turkey.
That must have been about the most expensive fix in history.
Yeah, there you go. But that was the killer for that car in America. It was the rat's nest, expertise. People didn't know where to put the hoses. And the more they tried, the more they messed up.
I will say, though, I mean, maybe it's easy to get hold of factory workshop manuals these days. I've done that exact job for a customer through my old business. I definitely was not an FD RX7 specialist. I remember cursing and swearing and wasting a lot of time on it because I didn't know what I was doing, but I still managed to actually fix it. I think the crying shame is that these things age and all of those little vacuum hoses go brittle from the heat. So it's a built-in time bomb, essentially. Is going to fail.
Yes, yep. we were one of the first using that blue silicone hose, and we had what we called the tie wrap job. It cost $4.95, and we were running 3 or 4 of those through the shop every day, and that really made a huge difference. Putting little zip ties to hold them on and stuff. And why the RX-7 went off the market is people take their RX-7s to the Mazda dealer, and the turbos weren't working, and they're under warranty, and they'd blow $4,000 or $5,000 of warranty time, put new turbos on, screw up all the hoses. The guy would leave the dealership, go up the road and blow them up again. So the warranty claims were just tremendous. It was just because it was so simple. They didn't know how to put the hoses on properly. But anyhow, we're eating up our last time here, and I'd like to just cover that. So I went on to be an entrepreneur. I built a building and learned about construction in Manassas, Virginia, and that was also a car dealership for me. Just doing Highline independent car dealer. So the next 15 years of my life, I was a car dealer in Virginia and a real estate developer. And then finally, a gas station. I bought and built a gas station. I became
done everything.
Yeah, done everything, and that. But that life moved on, and that I'm starting to get older. We're talking about the 2019, 2020, and I'd sort of had enough of it. Over that whole period, I was too busy to do any motorsport. I was just overwhelmed with my business responsibilities, and I, so I decided, well, look, I'm going to kind of retire, and I want to head back to New Zealand, drive rally cars for fun. And I just divorced, and my daughter was a grown adult and moved off, so I really didn't have any family ties there, and I decided to pack up and moved back to New Zealand, which I did in 2021, and I went, of course, bought a RX-7 baddie rally car, so I've been doing the rallies, and that I'm now 68 years old, so I found that it was more difficult at 68 to be competitive than it was when I was 32, but I still really enjoy it, and I ran Rally New Zealand and infamously went off the Whonga coast down a 100-metre bank and was all caught on the evening news, and they played that out some. And I'm back, so I figured the rallying's great and I still love it, but let me have a go at road racing. So I'm currently running a RX-8 and the Mazda RX-8 series, and we get 28, 30 cars on the grid at all the top tracks in New Zealand, Hampton Downs, etc.
Yeah,
I've found it to be extremely competitive, and I'm still optimistic that I can make it to victory lane one day in that. But
I think you've probably seen enough success through your life that if that didn't happen, you probably wouldn't be too unhappy.
Well, that's true. And today I can honestly tell you that I am doing it for fun, because there's no chance I'm going to get somebody else to pay me for it.
Yeah, I think that's the reason you should be doing it. And as I kind of alluded to, here in New Zealand, the winner's check is probably not going to pay for the fuel that you just use during the day. Unfortunately, it's not like the US or bigger countries where there are actually proper prize purses. But doing it for fun's definitely the reason you should be doing it.
It is. And at my age, I'm just delighted to still be able to do it. I mean, I've been in motorsport for 45 years. And I've done a lot. I've done, been down to Baja, and I've done Pikes Peak hill climb, and so I just have tremendous memories of iconic things that I've achieved.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I've got to say, a lot of it started with that good friend of mine, Steve Potter. Steve and I are still good friends.
Yeah, Steve sounds like he's responsible for a lot of good in your life. So you just never know what's gonna happen when you meet someone.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I'm planning a trip back there to see him soon. So we're all getting older, but that's it. That's probably my story in 2 hours.
It's a hell of a story, Peter. I appreciate you sharing it with us. I do have one question, just with the Peter Farrell Supercars business. When you saw the writing was on the wall, as you put it, with the RX-7 coming to the end of its life.
Yeah.
I can only imagine that you could have segued that success into other Mazda models or even to other manufacturers. Or were you too deep in that Mazda world to go and start applying what you know to Nissan or Toyota or Chevrolet, for example?
No, what I learned is it wasn't easy money. That's the truth of it. Is you do a lot of work, a lot of man hours. And, all the Chinese exhausts were coming in for half price.
Yeah.
All the Japanese companies had good product that were good. And so there's too much competition.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That explains it.
I was in it when I was when I was one of the only guys. and I was never. I learned another thing is my prices were fair and reasonable, but I made sure I had proper profit margins, so it was profitable.
Yeah, you need that margin. And I mean, what I saw, not that we ever made parts through my old business, was it sort of became a bit of a race to the bottom with everyone undercutting everyone else. Yeah, if you can't have a decent margin, well, it's not much of a business, unfortunately.
No, and what happened is the HKSs and Graddies, no disrespect to them, but they let everybody with a repair shop be a dealer.
Yeah.
But those guys didn't have any special extra skills, and they were all just who could sell the cheapest exhaust for $5 over cost. And I wasn't prepared to play with that. In fact, a lot of customers, I had a little bit of a bad name, I'll tell you right now, because people would want to go buy it on the internet, was just coming out, bargain basement prices, and bring it to me to put it on. And I just said no. I mean, I'll go hungry doing that. So you buy my stuff, you'll get the benefit of our expertise and quality product that we know what to do, and your car's going to work well. But you got to buy my stuff. I don't install other people's stuff, and that's about when I learned to get out of it.
Yeah, I think that all sounds about right. And I think that ability to stick to your guns and say, no, you buy my stuff or go somewhere else is something that will set you apart. And I think that's an absolute fair line in the sand to have. I think in New Zealand, not that, again, we weren't making our own parts, but the flip side of that was, we would have a package of upgraded parts for a Mitsubishi Evo. And a customer would come in, get a quote for all of that, and then come back 3 weeks later with, here's all the parts, can you just fit them?
There you go. Yeah.
And I mean, because New Zealand's a small country, you don't have such a big customer base. If I'd said no, I would have been going hungry. So that's sort of the problem. I think when you've got a good reputation and you're in a country with a large customer base, that makes it much easier to hold tight on that line.
Yeah, well, and I got out because I saw the writing on the wall on that. So in closing, one thing I want to say is I only wish I'd found HP Academy and Andre Simon back in those days, because the content that you provide to people worldwide is just such a benefit. I had to do it the hard way, and they get all this expertise and knowledge from you, and then they can go buy all the very best hardware to implement it, and it's just night and day from my memories.
Yeah, I do appreciate. I'm never going to get angry hearing that sort of feedback. But ultimately, I think my path was similar to yours, just maybe a few years later, where I was figuring out for myself. I mean, I did have the benefit of forums, but the knowledge wasn't there. And essentially with our platform, I've created what I would have loved to have been able to pay for back when I was learning how to tune or build race engines or wiring harnesses or whatever it might be that you want to do. So I think the feedback resoundingly is positive. So we'll just keep on doing what we're doing.
Yeah. You still go to SEMA and the shows every year over there, don't you?
Oh, yes. I didn't go to SEMA last year. My GM did. Typically, we go to SEMA every year. This year, because I don't think we've been to PRI since pre-COVID. So yeah, bit of a difficult one for us. The timing between SEMA and PRI is annoyingly close enough that you sort of want to stay in the States, but too far apart that it's not really practical with a family. So this year, I think we're going to skip SEMA and we're going to go to PRI because
okay,
so it's a bit more laser focused on our target market.
Right, fair enough. Okay, great. Okay, hey, well, look, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I really enjoyed logging my history and that. So that's something that my story.
Yeah, absolutely, it's been a great story. But we aren't quite done with you yet, Peter, because we do still have the same three questions we asked all of our guests. So we'll get into those. The first of those is, what's next in the future for you? Retirement, more rallying?
No. Well, I'm enjoying being back in New Zealand, and I love the motorsport here. So I hope to be doing more rallying and more circuit racing. And I can tell you that I'm actually waiting to for a business that I own a small part of to be sold in America that's extremely lucrative. So I'm waiting for that big money to come, and if I get that, I'm going to go spend it racing and rallying cars and
awesome.
Enjoy the last decade of my useful racing life, having fun, doing what I've loved all my life. So that's my plans. I don't really plan on being too entrepreneurial, and I don't really want to run any day-to-day business. So have fun and enjoy the last chapter.
Can't argue with that. Next question. Is there any advice you give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster?
Yes. Well, the advice I do give young people is to make contacts.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that. It's been a backbone of your success, clearly. So yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Make contacts. And, when I thank Steve, I'll just say one thing. He says to me, yeah, Peter, I opened some doors for you, but you had the talent to make the most of it.
Yeah, it's more than just the contacts. You've still got to put in the hard work.
Yeah. So you've got to work hard, pursue contacts. If you've got some talent, that's going to be important too. But if you don't have your own money, if you're not bringing your own money, you got to get to meet people that do have some resources, because racing costs money.
Sure does. All right, Peter, last question for today. And maybe there isn't an option here, but let's see. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, how should they do so?
Well, my presence is on Facebook, but that's mostly people that actually know me. I do have a YouTube channel, but haven't really developed it, but that's PF Supercar 1. But there's some of my racing history on there, the races themselves.
Okay.
But I might actually revamp that, and I might revamp that. So they could keep an eye on that, PF Supercar 1. And, I am on Facebook, but I really don't respond to people that I actually don't know. But you could give it a shot. But
you're going to get inundated with technical questions on the rat's nest.
Well, look. Honestly, one of the reasons I don't want to do that, quite often I find I have information to contribute, but with all the keyboard warriors and stuff, you end up in controversy.
Yes, I know that well.
So I don't want to be arguing with somebody that thinks they have that I don't know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, that's fair. That is the downside of the internet, for sure.
Yeah, that is. But it's fantastic. I love the internet. And I still follow all of the forums and stuff, so pretty much got my finger on the pulse, but I'm probably beyond being somebody that they can reach out to and consult, because I didn't really enjoy doing the tech support for my Purple computers 35 years ago, and it's probably one of the last things I want to be doing now.
Don't want to reboot that now.
No, I don't want to reboot that now.
No, I think it sounds like you've worked too hard to be going back to those days.
I have to let sleeping dogs lie, I think. I think this guy's finished with his performance products tech support, okay?
It's more than fair. Okay, Peter, look, really appreciate your time today. It's a hell of a story. It went in all different directions, and you've got some achievements in your life that you should be absolutely proud of. So thank you very much for taking the time out today.
Right. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
No problem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tuned In, and don't forget, by using the code podcast500 at checkout, podcast listeners can get a huge $500 off our VIP package, which includes over 40 current courses, as well as a long list of courses to be released in the future. As a VIP, you'll also get lifetime access to our members-only webinars and our community forum. Lastly, we'd love it if you could leave a review or comment on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback really helps us to reach a wider audience, which in turn allows us to continue bringing you more high-quality guests. As a thank you, each week we'll randomly select a review or comment from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube and send the winner a free HPA t-shirt shipped anywhere in the world. It's also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and if your review or comment is chosen, I'll do my best to answer them directly. So this week, a big shout out to Second Tour CNC from YouTube, who has said, can't wait for the next episode. I love it. I'm interested in what new tech people are working on daily to keep the industry growing. Well, you know what? So am I. The new tech that constantly comes out in our performance industry is what continues to keep me excited and motivated about this industry that I love so much. And it's only getting better. If you want to reach out with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now, remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our Gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a Gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.